Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moikins from Big Mount Studio. If you're interested in iOS development, then subscribe and click on that bell icon down below, and then you'll get notified when I come out with new awesome tutorials. We now need a way to add days to our itinerary. So we're going to design and implement this feature in this video. We have a mock-up here that I shared with my patrons on patreon.com. So this is what we're going to build. We already have a pop-up to add trips, and this new mock-up looks pretty similar to that existing pop-up. So we're definitely going to start with the add trip pop-up and use that as a template. But one of the things that programmers don't like to do is repeat their code. This is called the dry principle. Don't repeat yourself. Repeating your code means that it's more difficult to maintain your app. If you need to make a change to your code, you now have to remember to do it in multiple places, and it just increases that chance that you're going to forget to do it everywhere. So don't repeat yourself. As we create our second pop-up, we'll be looking for refactoring opportunities to minimize duplicate code. Okay, let's head into our project, and we'll start with the existing similar pop-up, the add trip pop-up, and use that as our template and add another field to it for the day's description. But first, we're going to go into Bitbucket, and we're going to look at our task board and see what we've done and what we have to do. So it looks like we've already done this one. We added a floating action button, and we added an action sheet to give the user the opportunity to add a day or add a new activity. And then it says here to prototype the add day screen and show it to patrons. So I did that, and we got that approved. And in this video, we're going to create that pop-up to add days. And I'm also doing this right now. I prototyped the next screen, which will be to add activities. And that's a little bit more complex. So I have a prototype in front of my patrons right now, and they're making comments on it, and we're making adjustments to it right now. Okay, so we are in our Xcode project, and there's one thing I want to show you guys. Okay, in the previous video, we're talking about how to show our action sheet in iPads, because it shows up as like a popover. And there's one of the things that my patrons commented on was he was doing some testing and experimenting, and he said sometimes the action sheet moves to the side. Like right now, the action sheet was on top of the button, the floating action button. He says, but he had it move to the side, and the arrow was off again. So what he did is he changed the height and just made the height, we had it as 0. So now we're just changing it to the height of the button. And then when he did that, the arrow from the action sheet pointed directly in the center of the floating action button. So that's one change that I would recommend you guys do in your project if you're following along. Okay, so we're going to follow the same convention that we're using to manage our view controllers, storyboards, and files. So what we're going to need is another folder where we're going to keep the add day view controller. And let's see, I kind of want to organize this a little bit, so I'm just going to drag this down here. There we go. And then inside of here, I'm going to need a storyboard and a view controller Swift file. So let's add those. Not sure why that just popped open. Okay, good. So we have our 2 files. And again, I'm not quite sure why this keeps popping open. It's just something really weird. Okay, so we have our add day view controller and our storyboard here. So let's take a look at our add trip view controller, because that's what we're going to use as our template, I guess you could say. Okay, so we have our view controller here, and I think what I'm just going to do is just copy it. So what will I need? I think I just copy it right from here. And there's one more other thing I want to look at. That view, I believe, has a background color. So we're going to need that. Let's take a look here. Yeah, custom. 40%, black 40%. Okay, just remember that, guys. Black 40%. And then I'm going to copy this. And I don't think there's any constraints on it. No, there's not. It just has the auto resizing. Okay, that is fine. So first we need a view controller. And let's set the color. We want to make it black, and we want to make it 40%. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to paste in my pop-up. So what I'm going to do is just click on the safe area there and then paste it into that. And let's see. I know there was, yeah, okay, the auto resizing stayed with it. Okay, I was wondering if it was going to copy over. And how far down from the top should it be? So the Y, so 50. All right, that's fine. So we'll just change this to 50. There we go. So we got everything in the right position. Now, some of these things we're going to change, and we don't need. One of them being this button to add a photo. We don't need that. And for this, we can just say add day. Okay, so that's fine. And then we're going to need another text field, right, for the description of the day, because there's two things that we can enter. Let's take a look at our model here for our day. Yeah, there's a title and a subtitle. Okay, so that's one. So what I'll do is I need to make this a little bit bigger. So let's drag that down. Maybe that much. Wait, what am I dragging here? Oh, this is the image view. Yeah, we're not going to need this either. Okay, so let's select our pop-up view controller. There we go. And we'll drag that down. And let's add our text field here. I'm just going to copy this. I can need a little bit more room. Yeah, maybe that much. Okay, and this placeholder text will need to change. So let's update that. Instead of trip name, this is going to be the day or the date or title. So maybe we just say title or date. They can put in really whatever they want. And this is the subtitle. So I'll say description. And I'll let them know it's optional. It's not required. Now, what I want to do too is I also want to maybe copy over the code, or some of the code at least, from the other view controller. Because this has a lot of formatting and things that I can use. And I'm just going to copy everything except for, yeah, the rest of the code down here, I believe, is just for photos, selecting photos. So, yeah, we're not going to need any of this. Yeah, it's a UI image picker controller delegate. We don't need that. So maybe I'll just start with this. And we'll delete all of this and paste it in there. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, we don't need this image view button, so let's delete that. Trip text field. Let's rename this. In the model, it was just called title. So maybe I'll just call it title text field. And then we had a subtitle, right? Subtitle text field. So I'll just copy that, paste it in there. And that will just be subtitle text field. Okay, now let's hook up those outlets. Then I'm going to hold down Option, click on the view controller, and I'll open it up side by side. Okay, in the title text field, oh, you know what? We didn't set the custom class here. So let's do that. To our new view controller, add day view controller. There. Now we can set our outlets. Yeah, now you see the highlighting. All right, cool. Okay, so this other stuff, you see we have some errors here. So let's go take a look at that. The image view, we no longer have that, so we can delete that. Image view stuff again. And for this is, oh yeah, this is if I'm editing it. We're not editing or worrying about editing right now. So let's delete that altogether. And this is for the validation. So this did change. Let's copy that and stick it in here. Now, what I'm doing right now, just to explain to you, is I'm getting it to a point where we can build it, and then we'll go into running it and refactoring it. So that's all I'm working on right now, is just getting rid of the errors, just so I can build it and make sure everything builds. Okay. And for the saving, I'm going to comment this out for now. We're not going to worry about that. And then we're done with the saving, and we dismiss it. Okay, so let's build, make sure that works. All right, great. Now, the next thing I want to do is, of course, it's far from done, right? Is I want to just be able to run it and display this pop-up, just so I can see what it looks like and make sure that is working. So how do we show the add day view controller that we just created? Well, it was in the activities, and it was in the action sheet. So let's go into here. And this is where we just changed today at the beginning of the video. And let's find the day action here. Okay, this is when they tap on the add new day. And it looks like we create a function for it, which is down here. Because I was showing you two different ways on how you can respond to clicking on the action sheet. One was creating a function for it, and the other one was using a code block like this. So since we have this function already created, let's just stick with it. And I do like consistency. So when it comes time to adding a new activity, I'll probably do the same thing. I'll just create a handler, and I'll create a separate function instead of using a code block for it. Either one will work. So do you guys remember how to present a new view controller? Yeah, what you have to do first is you have to get a reference to the storyboard. And then once you have a reference to the storyboard, for us, we usually just instantiate the initial view controller, because the way I like to handle things is I like one storyboard with one view controller. That way, you get less conflicts when you're making changes and you're committing them like we are. We have a Git repository, and we're making changes and we're committing. And if you're on a project with more than one developer, it's especially important because storyboards are really good at causing merge conflicts. When two different developers work on a storyboard and then they want to merge, it's really easy to get merge conflicts. But it's harder to resolve those merge conflicts because when you're looking at a storyboard, it's all XML. So that reminds me, let's go into our storyboard here. Okay, we haven't set up the initial view controller, so we still need to do that. And we do that by just selecting the storyboard. We come into properties and say, this is the initial view controller. Okay, so the first thing we need is a storyboard reference. And this is all we need. We just need the name of the storyboard and the bundle. Bundle is your project and everything contained in your project. So by default, if you leave bundle as nil, it'll use the project that you're currently in. And that's what we're going to do. Now, do you guys remember how we did this last time? I could manually just type in the name of our view controller, add day view controller. But in an effort to minimize hard-coded strings, we're just going to look at the class. Let's make some room here. We're going to look at the class and get the string representation of the class name. And if you watch my previous videos, you'll know it's the string describing function. Not sure why my autocomplete isn't working here. There it is. I saw it for a second, but it's gone. Okay, but it's string describing. And now we can just reference the name of the class itself. The add day view controller .self. Okay. So that should work. And then for bundle, yeah, I said it was just nil, right? Okay, so now we have our storyboard. And once we have a storyboard, now we can get our view controller. I'll just say VC equals storyboard. And we want to instantiate the initial view controller. Initial view controller being the one that has the arrow pointing to it. Okay, now once we add the view controller, we can just present it. And where is my autocomplete? There it is. Sometimes, I don't know why this doesn't work. Obviously if I hit self.present view controller, it's the same thing as just typing in present view controller. But, I hit control space to bring up autocomplete, and it doesn't bring up the right one. So not sure why that's happening. But I expect it to work like this. Okay, view controller we want to present is this one, view controller. Animated, sure. Completion, no, we don't need anything for that. And I'm just going to delete the self dot because I am a minimalist, and if I don't need it, I don't use it. Okay, now this code, okay. So it's basically just saying that this instantiate initial view controller, well, a storyboard might not have that arrow pointing to a view controller, so there might not be an initial view controller. We know there definitely is one, and if there isn't, well, we want it to break right away so we know it's broken, and we can fix it before we deploy it to production. Okay, so this code should look familiar, right? We use the same code up here in the trips view controller. Here, let's see if we can find it. Yeah, right here. So take a look at these lines right here. So because this code looks kind of familiar, right? That's a flag that maybe we can refactor this and find a better way to reuse that same code. But first, let's just run it and make sure everything is looking okay. Okay, we'll go into this trip here, and then we'll add a new day. And we get an error. does it say? Unexpectedly found nil. So it can't find the title label. Okay, there is a title label, and this does indicate to me that it should be hooked up. Hold on, let me see. Maybe it's saying found nil while unwrapping. How do I see the rest of this message, guys? There we go. Just got to click it. Unexpected found nil while unwrapping an optional value. Which values are you talking about here? I think it's talking about title label or theme or main font name. Let's see. Yeah, that has a value, so that's not nil. So maybe it's this one. Title label nil. Okay, so this label is nil. So let's double check and make sure that that's hooked up. I'm on the wrong one. Okay, I'm just going to right click here. And yeah, so see, it doesn't have any referencing outlets. Otherwise, this would be hooked up right here. So it's weird that that outlet indicator was filled in. But that's okay. We can just fix that real quick. And I'm going to click on here and just look at all my outlets. Okay, so I have the subtitle, I have the title label, the text field, and then the view. And what else do I have here? My save button and cancel button. Those don't look like they're hooked up. Otherwise, they'd be in this list right here. So this, I guess, is kind of lying. But let's look it up. It makes sense because, we did create it new and we didn't hook up our outlets. So let's just hook that up right there. And now if I right click, I should see everything. Yeah, okay, so here's the outlets for the buttons. All right, good. So that's good. We got everything hooked up. Now let's run it again. And see, this is what I'm talking about. I just want to make sure that everything is working first before we move on. Okay, this looks good, but we can't see what's behind it. So what that tells me is we're not setting it to display over the current context. So let's go into our view controller and look at the properties here. And yeah, it's right here. So you see it's cover vertical. We want cross dissolve because cover vertical, it shows the animation that comes up from the bottom and goes up to the top. And then for presentation, well, we want over current context. That way it looks like more like a pop over. It's a window that's popped over the current context, the current view controller. All right, so let's run it again. Hey, there we go. Okay, much better. Cancel doesn't work. So what that means to me is those actions aren't hooked up either. So let's hook those up. So cancel over here and save is over here. And let's run it one more time. Okay, that works. And save. Let's just try that. Okay, we don't have anything in there. So we can add something. Click save. And it goes away. All right, that's fine. All right, guys, that looks good so far. Now, before we talked about a refactoring opportunity too, right? So let's explore that. It was in here, actually. Okay, so these two lines right here. So for me, what I'm going to do is this sounds like maybe an extension method. And it could be an extension off the storyboard or an extension off the UIViewController. And I think it'd work better as an extension of the UIViewController because then we can just grab the view controller's name that we're going to use. So for example, I want to be able to write code that looks like this. I want to say let viewController equals add day viewController. And I want to say something like get instance. And that's it. That's all I want. And I want to return my add day viewController. Okay, well because I'm redefining the viewController. So this obviously doesn't exist. So let's comment this out and let's create an extension for the UIViewController and create this function called getInstance. Okay, so in my resources folder here, I have extensions. So do we have an extension for the UIViewController already? No, we don't. So let's add one. And I just like to call it the class name that I'm extending and then the word extension. All right, there we go. And I think you can see the convention that I'm using here. Except, you know what? I am a little bit inconsistent here because some of them I have an S on it and some of them I don't. So you know what I'm going to do? Just for consistency, I'm going to get rid of the S. It shouldn't affect anything because it's not like it's a class name or anything like that. There we go. So it's just a rename. Okay, and we'll definitely need UIKit because it's a UI view controller. Okay, so here's my extension. Let's take a look here on how I want to call it. Notice I'm not creating an instance of this view controller. So this function right here will have to be static. Actually, while I'm here, I'm just going to copy that function name. Make it easy on ourselves a little bit. So it's going to be a static function. And it'll be getInstance. And then it's going to return, well, I have to return a UIViewController. You know, it has to be generic enough that I can use it for any view controller. So I can't return my addDayViewController. And then, you know, what did we do before? Well, we got our storyboard and then we instantiated the initial view controller. So that's what I'm going to do here. And I'm going to use the same function that I used before, the string describing. And then what I'm going to pass in is the view controller that I'm currently in. So I'll just say self. And that will use the name of whatever view controller that I'm calling this on. And bundle, that'll be nil. Okay. And once I have the storyboard, I can instantiate the initial view controller. So this function is a little bit limited. This will only work on the initial view controller. So if I have a storyboard that has 3 view controllers in it, I'll only be able to get the initial view controller, unless I create another function which says getInstance and passes in the storyboard identifier. If I need that, I'll create it. But I don't like to get in the habit of creating things I don't need right now. Otherwise, it's just wasted work because I might not ever need it. So as part of the Agile Manifesto is maximizing the amount of work not done is don't create stuff that you don't need right now because you might not ever need it. Okay, and I'm going to use an exclamation point because it should always work. If it doesn't work, then that means I didn't set up my storyboard right with a view controller that has the arrow pointing to it. Like this will fail. This will fail if we have this scenario. If I delete that, this will fail. But that's fine because it'll fail before it even gets to production and then I can fix it. So I'll make it the initial view controller and that should work. So let's take a look at this again. Let me just make sure everything looks fine. Okay, getting the storyboard, instantiating initial view controller. Yeah, that looks fine. Okay, so let's go into our code. Whoops, wrong place. Here we go. And let's delete this. And let's build it. Make sure everything works. Okay, build. Now let's run it just to make sure. Awesome. Okay, now we have our new handy method here. Let's update our other places where we were instantiating a view controller the old way, which is right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and I'm just going to say let view controller equals activities view controller dot get instance. All right, and then we can delete this. Okay, now I do need to cast it, right? Because if we look here, it's just returning a regular view controller. So I have to cast it as the activities view controller so I can set these properties. Otherwise, if it comes back as a view controller, it won't know what these properties are. Oh, that reminds me. Let's add a note for ourselves just to let us know that getInstance only gets the initial view controller. So I'm going to hold down Command and right-click on here. And do you remember how to add a comment that we can read? Yeah, just add 3 forward slashes. Another way you can do it too, I don't think I talked about this, maybe I did, is you can use 2 asterisks. Usually people can write comments with just /**. You know, this will work too. But if you want it to be able to see it, you know, with that question mark holding down the option, then add 2 asterisks. So let's add a comment that will remind myself, since I'm the only developer, or any other developers that might work on this in the future. All right, there we go. Clean up the formatting a little bit. So now that we have that, if we come into our code, now we can hold down Option, and it should have the comment right here. Just returns the initial view controller on a storyboard. All right, great. So again, let's build it and make sure everything's working. And then let's test the add trip, just because we did change that code. All right, great. So that's working too. Okay, now as you're developing and as you're coding things, making changes, this might be a good opportunity to do a commit because we know everything is working at this stage right now. We're going to continue and make some other changes. And if something fails or happens, then we can just roll things back. So I'm going to do a commit at this point. There we go. It's weird that it didn't get that. Let me just double check. Huh. Well, I'll have to rewind the video to see what happened here. But I'm not sure why that didn't go the first time. What should I say? There we go. Okay, so let's continue. We'll go back here. And, looking at this, adding a drop shadow. So we're adding a white drop shadow to our title label. And that was because on the other pop-up, you could have an image, and sometimes that title would get lost inside the image. Well, we don't have an image on this one. So it's safe to get rid of this code. We won't need that. Okay, now here's something. We're doing validation on the title text field. And we're also doing validation when we add a trip too, right? So here's another opportunity where we can refactor it because it's duplicate code. We're doing the exact same thing on two different text fields. So again, this is how I kind of approach it, is I think about, well, how do I want to write it? Instead of doing all this work right here where I validate it, and if it doesn't work, I just return. Maybe I can write it some other way. Like maybe we can write it like this. Guard title text field. And I could say, if it has a value, and if it has a value, then go on and create this name from the text field, else return, like that. Then what I can do in this has value, when I call it, I can do all this checking right here. I can create an extension. This will be like an extension property. Instead of a function, it'll be a property that I can call. So let's look into doing that. Let's add an extension for the UI text field. So we come to my extensions here, and we want to add new file. Oh, no, not, we want it just a Swift class. Extension, but no S. Okay, and let's see. I also want to do too is I want to alphabetize this, just so it's easier to find things, So that'll go up here, UI view, that'll come down at the bottom. And I think that's alphabetized, right? Okay, so this will be UI kit again. And then we're going to create an extension for the UI text field. All right, so I said it was going to be a property, right? Called has value, var has value. And then, we're going to return either true or false if it has a value or not. So let's do this. So we want to, say something like if the text has a value, or if it doesn't, if it's blank, return false because it doesn't have a value, else return true, something like that, for example. But boy, my autocomplete is really slow today. Okay. So when you use if statements like this, it's kind of like you want to think about, well, can I use a guard first? So let's try that. Let's try to use a guard here. Guard text, if it equals blank, then we're just going to return false. Okay. Then this will just exit early. So this just basically means that if it does have a value, no, I messed this up. It's true. So this basically just means if the text does have a value, then it's going to return true. Has value equals true. But if it doesn't, if it's blank, then we're going to run some code and we're going to return false at the end. So the code we want is the one that adds the image to the text field. So let's go back and take a look at that code again. Okay, right here. So I'm just going to copy this, and then we'll go back and then paste that in here. Okay, so we have an image view, has dimensions, and then we give it this blank image right here that we can't see. So let's just double click it. Okay, so it populates it again. Okay, so it puts that warning image in there. That's a bug inside of Xcode, of course. Okay, the UI text field doesn't know about title text field, so let's delete that. And we'll just access these properties directly. Okay, that should work. Let's test it. Let's go back here. Okay, so I return, and I think I did just get rid of all this. That's really cleaning it up. Okay, let's build it, make sure it builds. This new trip name isn't being used. It's not even going to be a new trip name anymore. It's going to be the new day. What do I call it? New title. That's fine. Doesn't matter. Let's run it, make sure it still works. Okay, if I try to save, yeah, okay, it still works. So it pops up, and then I can just click on here and then type in something else. You know, April 10th. 20th. So, you know what? One of the things that one of my patrons suggested to me, they said when I start typing, it should get rid of this warning icon because there's text in it now and it's no longer invalid, right? So I agree. I think that's a good idea. So we want to remove this icon when they start typing, when it does have a value. There's a really easy way to do that too. Let me show you guys here. So right here, it's the right view mode equals always. Well, instead of always showing it, let's just change it to unless editing. So we want to show it, but then when we're editing, it goes away. All right, let's test that. Okay, so it shows up. Then when I start typing, it goes away. But then if I backspace and it's invalid again, it comes back. So I think that's the desired behavior that my patron was talking about. I really like that idea. I think it works great. Now, there's something else too. I think, and we can always test this against users, but I think when someone adds a day, they probably want the first letter capitalized automatically, right? So when this keyboard shows up like this, where the shift is down, so let's change that. Let's capitalize that by default. Go into the storyboard, we select the text field. And let's look at the properties here. So capitalization, it's set to none right now. So you have a choice here. You can capitalize, you can have the keyboard automatically capitalize when you hit space, for every word, or you can just do it at the beginning of a sentence. And I think maybe like every word would be good even. So let's do that. So now when I come in here, you see the shift is down and now it automatically starts off as a capital letter. Okay, that's good. I think that's a nice convenience for the users. And if I hit space, I think it should go back to capital again. Yeah, it's because we did every word, right? All right, that looks awesome. So we made some changes where we refactored how the validation happens. So we want to make this same change in our other pop-up window. So I'm going to copy that. And let's go into our other trips window here. Oh, no, not here. It's the pop-up, right? Yeah. Okay, this is where we do the validation. So here, why don't I just do this? I'm going to paste it up here. Let's indent that. I just want to make sure I get that right name here. Okay. Then we can get rid of this whole block of code. So isn't it nice when you can refactor like that? We can get rid of this too. Oh yeah, whoops. I didn't copy over the text field. Okay, let's just grab that here. Oh, and both places. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's grab that correct text field there. Paste it in here. Paste it in there. Now we can delete this. And we don't need this anymore either. We don't need to set that. I think I can remove that from another place too. Yeah, there we go. So delete that. So there you go, guys. So we refactored that. We minimized our code. We minimized duplicate code. And we're applying the dry principle here. Don't repeat yourself. So this is good. This should build. And there's a couple other changes I want to make too. Let's come back here to this storyboard. And I want to make it the same as our other setting were the capital letters. So let's change that capitalization to words. And now let's run it just to test that pop-up, the add trip pop-up. Okay, keyboard comes up and it's showing a capital letter. I start typing. If I hit space, I get a capital letter again. Unless it's auto-corrected to doghouse. All right, that's good. No, that's good. Let's also test the validation too. Yeah, and if I start typing, it goes away. If it's blank again, it pops up. All right, great. So that looks good. Let's stop that. And I think what I'll do at this point is also do another commit because we're at a good point. We've made some changes, and I want to save what I have right now because it's in a working state. Okay. And make sure those are all checked off. We don't leave any behind. All right, guys, this is fun. I love minimizing duplicate code like this. So I think this is the next thing we're going to work on is saving. How are we going to save this day? How are we going to save the day? Okay, what we're going to do is we need a function in our model, right? So before, how do we create our other save functions? Yeah, we have trip functions here, and we use the trip functions to save things. But the day doesn't have any functions yet, day functions. So let's add that class. And we're just using the same naming convention that we had before. And let's look at the save function here. So we're going to be creating a new day. And this is how they created a new trip. So we just went into the model, went into the trip models, and we appended a new one. So what I will need to do is I'll need to go into the trip models. Now, trip models, remember that's an array of trip objects. So I need to go into the array of trip objects, find the trip I'm on, and then access the, let's just take a look at that model. Then access the day models property. When we add a new trip, I just want to append to the end of this array. So let's create our function here. First, we need a class name. Okay, now for our function, we'll make it static again. And the other one was called create trips, so we'll call this create days. Okay, now I mentioned before that we need to know which trip we're on, right? So we need like an index to access which trip in the array it is. So we'll have to pass that in. So I'll say create days, and then I need a trip index. That'll be an int. And then, hold on, let me look at something here real quick. Oops. Yeah, I just passed in the whole model. So we're going to do the same thing. Let's just pass in the day model. There we go. Do we want to return anything? No, I don't think we need to. Just for a reminder, in case any of you are copying this code, I want to put a reminder in here. Did I put one in the trip functions? Yeah, replace this with real code. Because everything I'm adding here is just temporary, right? It's going to go away when I close the app. Okay, so I want to access the data, and we want to access the trip models. And this is an array, so we're going to use our trip index that we pass in. Then we'll look at day models, and then from here we're going to append whatever we pass in, our new element, day model. All right, that should do it. Let me see here, create days, trip index, day model. You know, actually, let me rename this here. Create days at this index. And maybe I could say using day model. You know, that way it'll read better when we use it, right? Okay, so we have our function now. We're going to use our function here. Okay, so the first thing I think I'm going to do is create my day model. Okay, the title will be that new title. And the subtitle, well, we can just get that directly from the text field because it can be nil. There might not be any data in it. It could be empty string or it could have a value. So we just pull it directly from the text field. Okay, and for our activity model, so right now, like when we're adding a new day model, we don't have any activities yet. So the process is you have to add a day first, and then once you have your day, then you add activities to that day. So this will be nil. No activities. Okay, now that I have my day model, I can call that new function that I just created. Okay, so what does this say? Oh yeah, so, it's optional. It can be nil. So if it's nil, let's just save an empty string. So I'll use this one right here that uses the coalesce operator. And for the default value, well, where is it? Right here. We're just going to change that to empty string. Okay, that looks good. Now let's call our function to save it. Okay, we don't have the index yet. So for now, let me just put it at 0. And then we'll pass in our day model. Let's run that just to make sure this works. Of course, we're going to be adding it to the first trip, which is the one we usually go into. Yeah, let's just run it now to make sure it works, that we're not getting any errors. Real quick test. New day. So that worked fine. And we're not going to see any results. We're not going to see the day because we haven't coded anything to actually show it in the table view. But I just want to make sure that we're not getting any errors. For now, I think we can delete this. And now let's work on getting the correct trip index. So let's see. So we have this old variable here from what we copied over. It's the index of the trip we're going to edit. We don't really need that right now, but what we do need is the trip index. So we have to pass in a trip index so we know which trip we're adding to. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename this to trip index. And we're going to pass in an int, but now it's going to be required. We have to set that or else this isn't going to work. So I'm going to use an exclamation point instead. So let's copy that and we'll stick it down here instead of this 0. Now what we have to do is we have to set this variable when we come into this view controller. So let's go back to the code that opens this view controller, and it's right here. So now I need to set that. But remember, I can't use VC right here. See, there's no trip index here because this just passed back a regular UI view controller. So what we'll have to do is we have to cast it again. Like that. And then we should be able to see that property. It's still the old property, so what I'm going to do is just comment it and build it. And that should update all the autocomplete properties there. There it is, trip index. So what is the trip index here? Well, we'll have to get that from, well, let's see what we have up here. We have the trip ID, we have the trip model. So those could help us, but what we really need is we need that index. We need to know which trip in the array of trips is the one that we're going to be adding to. So what we need to do is we need to go through our trip models, and we have to find the one that matches this trip ID that we already have set up above. All right, so how do we do that? Well, we could use like a for each loop and go through each one and say, does the ID equal this one? Does ID equal that one? There's another function that we can use too that arrays have. Arrays have a lot of functions for searching and filtering. It's pretty cool. There's one called first index, like first index of trip models. There's one called first index right here. So like it says here, returns the first index in which the element of the collection satisfies the given predicate. Predicate is a filter or a condition to match something to something else. And that's what we want. We want to return an index, a number. So we want the first index, and I'll just hit enter here. And as you can see, what we're passing in is the trip model. So that'll be a variable name, trip model, and that represents every trip that I'm cycling through. And then we want to specify our condition that we have to satisfy in order for it to return the index. So for every trip model, we're going to look at the ID. Then we're going to see if it matches the trip ID that we have above. So again, this trip ID we're getting from up here, which is set when we come into this view controller. We need 2 equals. Okay, so basically it's going to look at every single trip model until it finds this matching condition, and then it's going to return our index that we set right here. And it should find it. There shouldn't be a condition where it doesn't find it because we're in a trip right now. Okay, so now that we have that set, let's make sure it builds. Okay, now that we have the trip index, we can save our new day to the appropriate trip, and now we need to focus on repopulating that table view to show the new day. So you might have noticed that there is a done saving closure that we have right here. And this gets called right after the save is done. And we did this on the other view controller as well. When we added a new trip, we called done saving. Let's see what it did. Let's go find where it was. Was it in a segue? We set it? Yeah, here it is right here. So, we looked at it and we said, okay, when we get it back, we reloaded the table view. So we're going to do something like that, for this done saving. Oh, you know what? This code, switch 4.2 came out. So let's update this. We can do guard let self equals self else return. There we go. And then we don't need this anymore. So we're going to use the same thing. Actually, let me just copy it, save ourselves some time here. And we'll just set it right here. Okay, so we're passing in a weak version of our view controller. And then we want to make sure that it still exists. And if it doesn't, we'll just jump out of here. And then we'll access the table view and reload the data, and it should show our new day. So let's run that, make sure that works. Okay, and we should see it pop up down here. So let's add that. And we'll just say new day. And nothing shows up. So why didn't anything show up? Well, let's take a look at something here. Let's take a look at how it originally gets populated. So when we first come in here, what we do is we read the trip, and then we get a model back, and we assign it to this variable right here. So this variable, this trip model, this is where it's reading the data from. So when we save it, we are saving it to the global data repository, right? But this needs to be called again. We need to reread the trips and get all the data again. So we really need to call this function right here. We need to call it right here. So when we're done saving, we should call it right here. But that's a lot of code to put in there, and then we'll be duplicating again, right? So remember, we don't want to repeat ourselves. So what we could do is we can take this and we can extract it into a function. There we go. And we'll just call it call it what it does. It updates the table view with trip data. And now that we have that, we can just copy that and call it right here instead. All right, so let's run it and see how that works. Okay, come down here and we'll add new day. Again, I'll just call it new day. And there it is, shows up right down here. Okay, there's something bugging me, and that is, you notice our floating action button covers up our cells. So what I want to do is I want to add a spacer at the bottom of my table view, like a footer. That's exactly what it is, actually. It's not like a footer, it is a footer. I'm going to add a UI view for a footer that gives us more space at the bottom. So let's handle that first before we continue. Okay, so let's add a UI view. And so here's what I'm going to do. I just grab the UI view, drag it onto the table, and then just drop it right there. And that becomes my footer, my UI view for my footer. But it'll show up as white, solid white. I don't want white. I want to use a clear color. And then I'm going to expand it a little bit. Maybe, well, how tall is this button? Button is 56 by 56. And then how big did I make this view? 80. 70 should be fine then. Round it out there. So let's test that. Make sure we get enough space there at the bottom. Okay, scroll down. And now you notice how I have a nice space here at the bottom. So it doesn't cover up any important data that might be in this cell. So that's good. That's exactly what I want. And if I add new day, okay, adds it to the bottom. We can clearly see it. All right, this is good. There's something that I need to tell you guys about. So let's go back to our slides. Okay, time for a word of caution with remote data sources. Now, the way we are saving and repopulating the table view right now is fine if your data store is local to your phone only. What I mean is, if we had to save that new day and it went out to a data store to save it, and then we had to reread that whole trip and all of the days and all of the activities back into our phone, well, that can be an expensive data transfer. So what we want to do is we want to do our best to minimize data transfers back and forth to the user's phone. The reason we want to do this is because it can save you a lot of money. If you're using a remote data store like Firestore, then most likely you're paying for all the transactions going back and forth to that data store, or you're paying for the amount of data coming and going to that data store. This is also beneficial to the user in terms of performance and cost, especially in places where the connection is poor and the cost of data might be higher. So let's head back into our project, and I'll show you another way in which we can manage our data locally so we can eliminate a data transaction, which is basically what we're going to eliminate is when we read that trip again from the data store. We're going to do this by manually managing our local data store so it's in sync or matches our remote data. Okay, so here's the basic idea. This is what we want to eliminate right here, because calling this function goes out and reads that trip data again. And like I said, if you're just reading it locally, then there's probably no problem. But if you want to turn this application into something that reads from a remote data store, then this is going to be costly. So we want to eliminate this right here. And then the next step is we have to somehow get that new day that we added and manually add it ourselves to this variable up here, to the trip model. So we're manually going to add the day to that trip model. So then when we refresh the table view, it'll show it. Okay, but right now, we're not getting the model back. So we want to pass the model back from our popup, our add day view controller. So we're going to have to change some things in order to do that. The first thing we're going to have to do is come here and say that we're returning a day model, like that. So when we're done saving, we just pass that back. And we have our day model right here. So when done saving is called, it passes our day model back to us. Okay, let's go back. All right. So notice now, look at this error. It's saying that it cannot conform to the type because now we're passing back a day model. So we want to add our day model right here. You know, if you wrote out the whole thing, like just so it makes more sense, you could write it like this. See, now this signature matches more the property of the done saving. Like if we look at done saving real quick, you see that signature right there, where it passes in a day model and returns nothing. Okay, but for shorthand, you can just delete that and just pass it in that way. Okay, now that we have our day model, we can add it to our trip model. So we're going to say trip model right here, and that's a local variable. And then we want to go into our day models. Then we want to append it. Okay, now this local variable has updated data. And you really have to take care here because, again, we're keeping the data in sync locally here on this view controller. We're keeping it in sync with what's in the database because when we save the trip, we're going out and we're saving it to our data store, wherever that may be. And if we manually update the data on this view controller, then that's saving us a trip from having to read data from a remote data store. Okay, now that that's done, we can just reload the data. Okay, so let's test that, make sure that works. I just like to scroll down so I can see the new day being added here. And let's give it a description this time, since we've never tested that. Okay, all right, it looks good. It added the new day for us. Okay, cool. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you guys. You notice when the new day was added, it just kind of like appeared there and everything kind of jerked up. Well, you can animate it, and that is built in. I'll show you how to do that. So instead of reloading the data, Because what reload does is it reloads everything. And if this table is huge, it's going to go through the whole table and reload all the data. So instead of doing that, what we can do is just insert the section that we just added, the individual section that we just added. So instead of reloading, we're going to say insert section, insert sections, because you can add more than one. Okay, it wants an index set. It basically wants to know, where should I insert this section out of all of your sections that you already have right now? So basically what we want to do is we want to find out what the last index is and then add it to the end of that. So we need to create an index set. So here's what we'll do. Let's leave that alone for now, and let's get our index first. And remember, index set is an array, so I'm going to put our index into an array. Now what we want to do is we want to find out how many day models we already have, how many days we already have. So we want to get the count. And that should be good. That should be all we really need. But there's one other thing here too. So the trip model could be nil somehow. I have it set up so that it could be nil because it's optional there with that question mark. And if anything happens, what we'll do is we'll just add it to the first index. So that way we'll just prevent an error. Okay, so index set. How do we create an index set? Well, we just say index set, and then we can just pass in our index array like that. So I should actually, if I'm going to, give this a more appropriate name, it's actually an index array that we have because I put these brackets around it. There, index array. Okay, with the animation, what kind of animation do we want? Well, what I usually do is I usually just go with the default. Is there a default? Oh no, it's called automatic. There it is. So it'll choose it for you. But you can see the other choices that you have. You can have it appear from the bottom. You can fade it in, have it come in from the left, the middle. So I'm just choosing automatic. All right, let's test this. And we'll save it. And we get a crash. Okay, what happened? Well, to find out what happened, we want to look in the console output here. And we scroll up to the top and we start from right above the call stack and start reading here. Uncaught exception, internal inconsistency exception. Attempt to insert section 6, but there are only 6 sections after the update. What does that mean? What happened here? It basically means that we try to insert something, section 6, or an index. We try to insert a section in array index 6. But after we inserted it, there are only 6 sections. So remember the count and the example that I showed you? So what it's expecting is after you insert something, the count should be 7 because you're inserting something at index 6. Because you're inserting something at index 6, there should be 7 items because it's 0 based. There's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what did we do wrong? Let's take a look. So here's the problem is I added the day model before I looked at the count. So the count is off. So say there's only 5 days, right? Before we started, there's only 5 days. And then I add one, and now there's 6. And so now when we get the count, it's getting a 6. So what I want to do is I want to get that count before I add this model. So all I have to do is just switch around this line here. I think there's a key command that switches lines around. I don't remember what it is, though. I never use it. So this is what we want. We want the count of the index. And remember, this is the index of where this new day model is going. So we have to get the count or get our index where we're going to insert it before we add it to our day model. Okay, now remember, when I click the save, it should be animated now. So look down here and let's look for the animation. There we go. It's harder to see because it just came in from the side. It came in from the left and came in. But let's add a new day with a description. so it's more obvious when we see an animation happen. See it capitalizing automatically. There we go. So that made it a little bit more obvious. And that gives a nicer look and feel. It's these little things, that the user will probably never notice, but again, he won't notice it just popping up and happening abruptly either. Whew. Okay, guys, that's it for this video. If you made it through to the very end of this video, I'll be super impressed. Leave a comment down below and say, yes, Mark, I made it all the way to the end of the video, and I'll give you a congratulations. Okay, so we learned a lot in this video. We learned about refactoring, the dry principle, don't repeat yourself. We created UIViewController extensions, to get the instance. That was pretty handy. We can definitely use something like that in all of our projects. We also created an extension for the UI text field to check to see if it has a value or not. And if it doesn't, then we just show that warning icon. And then I showed you a couple different ways on how we can update our table view without the cost of a data transfer from a remote data source. And then I showed you a couple of ways on how we can update the table view after we add a new day. And one of the ways is how to minimize data transfer. So we're able to completely minimize a data transfer to save you money and to save your users money. And then I showed you how you can animate the inserts into a table. Okay, guys, if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Share it on Twitter. Feel free to tag me. My Twitter handle is down there. If you want to help out my channel, then you can translate the title and the description only for this video in your native language so people who speak your language can more easily find this video. All right, thanks, guys, and keep climbing that big mountain to be a great developer.